Good afternoon, ladies and germs. This is your ticker guy coming at you from a wonderful place. I did not get hurricaned. I'm not there. Uh, Tell Laura I love her. Maybe not so much, huh? Um, okay. I wanted to point out some things that have come up in the last few days and I find to be extraordinarily annoying. And yet, the told you so sign has been waved more than a few times in the last few days. Some of them are especially egregious. But before I talk about the egregious nature of the coronavirus game playing that's been going on in this country and start asking some very simple yet complicated questions that nobody wants to take on, I want to point out what the so-called science scam has run on all of us for a very long time. Remember, we have been told for a very, very long time that you should not eat saturated fats. That saturated fat intake should be 10% or less of your calories, and that the reason for this is it will reduce your incidence of cardiovascular disease. Many of you know, if you've been reading my blog for any length of time, that back after Obama passed Obamacare, and I came to the conclusion that the path that the country was on was going to bankrupt the Medicare system, and I, like many other men, as I had gotten out of my 20s and in my 30s and 40s, started to get fatter, notably so, and my other metabolic markers started to deteriorate. I realized that, like many of those people, I was likely to end up in a situation that was untenable not all that far down the road, specifically probably overweight and diabetic, and said, oh no, because as you get older, of course, when you get to be 65, you get forced onto Medicare, whether you like it or not. If the program is either not there or hideously expensive, you can opt out of it. But if you ever do, then you're penalized permanently if you ever try to come back in. After my father died, my mother had a short period of time where, due to an error on her part, she was not enrolled, and the penalty was permanent. Now, she never used anything. There was no scamming on her part or an attempt to scam or anything else, but there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. And it was a very short lapse, and she got screwed fairly seriously throughout the rest of her life with higher premiums. So it's a clever extortion game. You basically have to make a decision. And I realized that in all probability what was going to happen was that I was going to die a horrible death. And that probability was not something that I liked very much. And so I went on a ketogenic diet, started running again, something I'd not done since I was in high school, and lost 60 pounds, which incidentally have stayed off. So, well, the majority of them, 50 of them have stayed off. The other 10 are back. Well, the other 10 are back because I really don't care at this point. I'm not in race trim. Why? Because there's no races. Why are there no races? Because of the COVID scam. But let me point this out here. We had been told for years not to eat saturated fats. We were told by these so-called experts. We have tens of millions of Americans who are going to die from complications from diabetes and heart disease caused by eating a high-carbohydrate, low-fat diet. You can go ahead and you can try to tell me it's not true all you want. Listen, you can come up with all the vegan and vegetarian examples that you'd love to, come up with. And folks, there are ways to do that, okay? Don't get me wrong. It is possible for you to live a vegetarian lifestyle in such a way that you don't eat much in the way of fast carbohydrates. It's very difficult, but it can be done, but almost nobody does. Most of the people who are pushing this for reasons that have nothing to do with science. But if you believe in the so-called settled science nonsense, you were led down a primrose path and you were slaughtered. Back in February, I noted that there was an outbreak of COVID, two of them actually, one in Wuhan, another one in Hong Kong, that were in apartment buildings where there were no P-traps on the sewer pipes. And the people who got it were 10 floors apart in at least one case. They didn't know each other And there was no plausible point of contact for them to have possibly gotten it from each other due to ordinary interactions, because they never did interact with each other. The only plausible explanation was that one of them got it, expelled it in their crap, it went down the sewer pipe, and because there were no P-traps, it came back out the sinks. And this was where my fecal-oral transmission theorem came from. It's where the hypothesis was born from. It also led to my hypothesis that we would see a terrible problem in nursing homes and that white man sanitation good would attenuate things in the United States. Well, it would have if we had paid attention to this. But no, the CDC has said, oh no, fecal-oral transmission and fecal aerosols are not the way this is. It's all spread through droplets, and you should wear a mask. And do you know why? Because 40% of people approximately that are in nursing homes are incontinent. And that means, folks, that they're wearing Depends. They crap themselves. It's sad, but it's fact. And if you do not have a very robust control mechanism, especially if something can come out of your butt and go airborne as an aerosol, you got a huge problem. In fact, in that case, you can forget about controlling the spread of the virus by anything other than locking people in their houses and not letting them out at all. All the rest of your mitigation measures are a waste of time. All of them. And that was exactly what I hypothesized, that was what was going on. That was the primary mode of spread. That and possibly aerosols from highly symptomatic people. Let's face it, coughing is a very efficient way to spread things. Okay? But asymptomatic spread, it just didn't fit the numbers. It didn't fit the pathways. And then we had a handful of documented cases where, in fact, we had one situation over in a meatpacking plant in Germany where it essentially had to be aerosol or it had to be crap. There's essentially no possible way that it wasn't one of those things. Why? Because the spread was not limited to people within 6 or 10 feet of the index case, and they were able to trace the index case. And because they traced the index case, they knew who it was, and they got lucky on that. They actually RNA sequenced the virus that these people had, something that our people, when they trace viruses, don't do. Why? Well, it's expensive, and secondly, if you prove where the index came from, then people's BS goes poof like a fart in a church. A coronavirus-laden fart at that. Oh, no, we can't have that. That might puncture some of the narratives. But in Germany, they did. Nobody's paid attention to that. I've quoted it. I've cited it several times. By the way, all the people in that plant had masks on, didn't do a damn thing. Why? Well, because either they were all sharing a bathroom and it's fecally spread, or it was spread in aerosols and masks are worthless. Either way, pick. Okay? By the way, even with droplets, masks are not very useful. And I've cited that study too. There's one from 1981 where they got rid of masks in an operating room. It was originally supposed to run 1 month, and they expected they'd have to terminate it early because the rate of infections would go up dramatically. What actually happened was the rate of infections went down by 50%. Instead of running the experiment for 1 month, they ran it for 6 because they didn't believe when they didn't see the infection rate go up. They said, well, maybe we don't have enough data here. It's not high-powered enough. So instead of running the experiment for 1 month, they continued it for 6 months. And what they found at the end of the 6 months was there were 50% fewer infections in the people that were laying on the operating room table. Of course, they're out. When the source control measure, the mask on the face of the surgeon, wasn't there. Nobody wants to talk about that study. That was back when we actually did science. It was 1981. It was prior to the AIDS scam and all of the BS that went on along with that, all the fake science and all of the claims. Oh, we're going to have a vaccine. Oh, anyone can get it through casual sex. It happens. It's very, very easy to spread through heterosexual contact. Now, the truth, folks, is that most, not all people, but most people got it through direct blood-borne contact. Either anal sex, IV drug use where they were sharing needles, or if you were unfortunate enough to be a hemophiliac, before they were able to test the blood supply. They gave you a lethal dose and you died. There were predictions made that 1/3 of all American adults were going to die of AIDS. By the very same people who ran these same studies, these same claims, computer models, by God, that said that 200,000 people are going to die in Sweden and under 6,000 have. And Sweden has, without question, reached herd suppression. So has Sevier County. So have a lot of other places. I had a guy spit back at me that, Alabama's trying to have a little spike. Maybe it's a big spike. Alabama's case rate is 50% of where it was about a month ago. It's down by half. Oh, yeah, there's a little hook in the data. Okay. Suppression, by the way, doesn't mean nobody gets it, especially when you have a couple of colleges where a bunch of kids go out and get it. There are cases, but hey, do people go to the hospitals? Have there been any increase in hospitalizations? No, there haven't. Gee, I wonder why. Oh, my God. We really are, folks, we really are playing this game this stupidly. But I want to point this study out. Why do I want to point this study out? Because here we go again, okay? These scientists. Listen to the scientists. Well, folks, science is about challenging your beliefs. The reason the 1981 mask study was so interesting to me is that they ran it at all. After all, the medical orthodoxy is that if you're a surgeon or you're a doctor, you wear a mask because you might contaminate an open wound when you're working on somebody who has an open wound, especially when you intentionally create the wound with a scalpel to go in there and fix whatever it is it screwed up. As it turns out, they ran the experiment, even though the orthodoxy said that, no, that should be unethical, right? Because it absolutely will cause more infections. Well, it actually didn't. It caused fewer. Do remember, ladies and gentlemen, that we used to believe that illness was caused by evil spirits. The physician who bucked that trend and essentially proved otherwise with his hypothesis, which ended up being proved correct, was drummed out of medical practice and driven crazy by colleagues of his who called him a nut job. He died in an insane asylum. He was right, but nobody believed him. The whole point of science is to devise tests that are supposed to falsify your belief, not try to confirm it. Well, this is one of the problems we have right now. So where are we here? Well, guess what? Here we go. Bloomberg. The discovery of coronavirus in the bathroom of an unoccupied apartment suggests the airborne pathogens must have wafted upwards through the drain pipes, an echo of a large SARS outbreak in Hong Kong 17 years ago. Traces of SARS-CoV-2 were detected in February on the sink in a long vacant apartment. I talked about this, folks, in February, because we had this case and we had another case in Hong Kong, and it made clear that we have this problem. But you know what? If you go here, then we got a problem with the way that we treat medical people and the way that we treat this disease. You see, about half the people that have died of COVID have been people that were in nursing homes. And nursing homes are less than 1% of the population. In fact, they're about, in most states, they're about 0.5%. I've looked this number up. I had a couple of physicians challenge me on this a couple months ago because they didn't believe me. They said, oh, no, the number can't be that low. Well, it is. And yet they're 50% of deaths. And approximately 40% of the people in nursing homes are incontinent. So guess how this is getting spread? Because guess what? If you're incontinent, you're not changing your own. So how did this get spread among all these people in the nursing home? Gee, I wonder why. And were these medical people heroes? No, they were vectors. And what's worse is they vectored this into the most vulnerable. Now, what could we have done when this began? We knew this in February, folks. This is not new news. This is reported in Bloomberg, August 26th at 9:40 in the morning and updated on the 27th, updated this morning at 1 a.m. Well, when did I know this? When was I talking about this? In February, in early March. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. And do you know that we could have stopped this immediately? Do you know how? You take all the people that work in those places and you lock them in. You put RVs in the parking lot. That's where you're going to live for the next 6 months. until we get to herd suppression. Why? Because all the people in there, this virus can kill. And you and I running around outside that are in good health, not so much. So people say, oh, well, you can't do that. They'd all quit. Well, guess what? There's a price at which they won't. Some will, regardless, because, they're just not willing to be locked in or can't be for whatever reason. Maybe they're a single parent and they have a small child at home. Can't be done. Wouldn't bet on it, though, for most of them. All of these trillions of dollars that we printed up, for half of 1% of the population, approximately, less than 1%, it's about half of 1%. Could have taken that half of the 1% that's in those care homes. You could have taken all the people who work there, doctors, nurses, orderlies, everybody else. You could have put RVs in the parking lot and said, you're not leaving until this thing's under control, until we have herd suppression and you're not walking around getting people sick. Because if you walk around out in the general public and you bring this thing in here and you give it to one of these people, they're going to crap it out and they're going to give it to everybody else, and half of them are going to die. Well, that's exactly what happened in Kirkland, right? By the way, why didn't the other half die? That's a forced inoculation environment. What happened? The other half are immune. Maybe not completely, but partly. Well, we knew that in March too, didn't we? Yes, we did. I've been talking about that as well, which is why suppression comes in at about 2% test positive in a given area. Not at 6 or 7%, not at 66%, which, by the way, is what an R naught of 3 would imply. You need 66% infected. 10 to 1 infected to test positive. And guess what? We're just about there all the way across. And if you leave things alone or minimally interfere with them, just enough that the hospital system doesn't get overloaded. Do you know how long it lasts? It lasts 6 weeks. Go look at the charts. I put that up on the last video. So 50% of the people that have died of this disease, half, folks, we could have stopped almost all of it at a very low cost. And we knew it in February and March, and we didn't do it, and we didn't do it on purpose. Because if we did it, we had to stop calling people heroes who aren't. We had to face science. There was no plausible explanation for those 2 outbreaks in those 2 apartment buildings, other than that it was being transmitted through the sewer pipes. And why do we know that? Because they don't have traps. Very different, folks. Over here, we have traps. Okay? So it's all part of the reason that these viruses tend to originate over in southern Asia. The reason it happens, the reason that the Asian area, that China is the source of most of these, is that they just don't treat things the way we do. Yeah. And historically speaking, that's where these things have come from. And we did it again. All right. Now, next up. So we got half the deaths accounted for out of pure stupidity. Absolutely nobody should put up with a single mandate, a single business closure, a single mask order, a single anything else related to protecting people in nursing homes, because we know how to do that. It's called don't let them come in contact with people who aren't immune and might have it. And how do you do that? Well, you can pay people money to be those caretakers and not leave. And you can sure as hell prevent them from going out and moonlighting in home care environments where they can give it to other people who are vulnerable too and kill them. Yeah, we could do that. Interesting thing, folks. Think about these mandates as exactly the opposite of what you would expect. You have a person who is in a nursing home, they're compromised, right? So let's say that person is blind in one eye, just for the sake of argument. And that means that they don't have any depth perception because they've only got one eye. You need 2 eyes for depth perception. So what would you do in that situation? Would you have somebody who can provide the functions in life that need depth perception for them? Or would you force everybody to poke out one of their eyes so we're all equal? What did Donald J. Trump do? What have all the governors done? What has Whitlis done? What has Mike Lee done? What has our mayor done? He's told everybody to poke out one of their eyes. You must wear a mask. Why? Well, because you might give it to somebody who could then transmit it to someone who's vulnerable. Wasn't that vulnerable person hide in their house? Well, that's not fair. Well, wait a minute. Did I caused them to eat themselves to death for the last 40 years, who weigh 350 pounds and be diabetic? Oh, you're telling me I got to poke my eye out? No. But see, here's the thing. We knew this was fecally transmitted. We're still not talking about it. And the reason, folks, is that as soon as you go there, as soon as that happens, think about this. What did I say a couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks ago? You have a mask on, you go into a restaurant, you sit down, you got to take it off to eat, right? Then you got to use the bathroom. Well, the law, so-called law, order, ordinance, whatever you want to call it, that Mayor douche nozzle Waters put into place here says that when you're not actually seated at the table and actually eating or drinking, and by the way, this is very, very much like what they're doing in a lot of other places, you have to have the mask on. So in order to comply, if you're dumb enough to do it, you got to put the thing back on to go to the restroom. And since we now Bloomberg's actually admitting what I was talking about in February and March, which is why I won't play this game. You go into that bathroom and the guy in the next stall flushes the toilet. And as soon as he does, if he's got COVID, you've got it on your mask. And now you take that mask off and you put it down in order to eat, to resume consuming your food and or drink. You just inoculated yourself. Congratulations. You got it on your hands. What's worse is you may give it to everybody at the table. You may also give it to the server. That really sucks. You want to know how this thing's being passed around? Well, there you go, folks. There you go. Okay? Masks do exactly 0 against either aerosols or fecal oral transmission. Now we got an admission that fecal orals are part of the game. Well, let's talk about 2 other things. First off, hydroxychloroquine. Been a lot of screaming about that. Well, here is the study, Chorus study. This one's been we've been waiting for results on this for a while. After adjustment for propensity scores, we found a 30% lower risk of death in patients receiving HCQ. Hazard ratio 0.70. That means 70% as dangerous as not using it. 95% confidence interval is 0.59 to 0.84. This is quite important here, folks, because notice that this is the confidence interval is the interval over which the results could be. Okay? So the important thing is that for something that has a 1.0 as the ordinary course of outcome, anytime the CI crosses 1.0, you have non-statistically significant results. This, however, does not cross there, which means that the real difference could be somewhere between 40% reduction and 16% reduction. Either way, that's pretty good reduction. And the E value is 1.67. That's pretty good too. All right. So this here, all right. Now this is of course very interesting because remember we heard convalescent plasma had a 30% reduction in the risk of death. But convalescent plasma is an IV drug. And this here, folks, this here was use in a hospital. So this was not early use on diagnosis. This was use after hospitalization, which is a little later than all of the different reasons to believe it would work are there. And yet it appears it works anyway. Hypothesis that I'll put out there. A big part of this is that hydroxychloroquine is also an inflammation inhibitor. It's that one's it's not really shaky. It's known, but exactly how that plays into it, but I have to believe that's a part of this. Okay, and then we've got a paper here, Real Clear Policy, talking about this too. And you know, here we are. Fauci says, "Oh, but you must have random controlled trials." Now, you know what? Fauci didn't require random controlled trials before he pushed for AZT to be available to people with AIDS. AZT turned out to be worthless, by the way. A lot of people still to this day don't realize that. AZT was a failed cancer drug that it failed on safety. As it turns out, AZT inhibits DNA replication and T-cell replication specifically. It tends to go directly at the bone marrow. And what does HIV do? Yeah. So, maybe it gave you a few more months of feeling okay if you actually had it. But what happens if we gave it to somebody who got a false positive on the test? Because we didn't have confirmatory tests in those early years. Well, you probably killed them. How many of the 500,000 people, Americans, that we shoved in the hole were shoved in the hole by the people who, hey, man, let's just use this failed drug. And hydroxychloroquine isn't AZT. Hydroxychloroquine has a 60-year safety record. We know what it is. But it gets better, folks. It gets better. All right? It's not just hydroxychloroquine. Look at this. A U.S. clinical trial of ivermectin found that it reduced the mortality rate of COVID-19 patients by 40%, 4 out of 10. Now, this is a relatively small study, 280 patients. 173 were treated and 107 that had standard of care. By the way, we're going to talk about the standard of care. Overall mortality in those who took the treatment was 15% compared to those who did not take it, who had a 25% mortality rate. That's a 40% drop overall. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the most notable result is that it tended to be more effective in people that had the highest risk of bad things happening. It's real interesting in that close to 4 billion doses of this drug have been taken by people since its approval. It is a extraordinarily safe drug, and it's a one-time dose regime. In addition to that, it is extremely cheap. This study is up for peer review. It has not yet gone through the peer review process. We'll see what that comes up with, but that's recent, okay? And then we got another one. In this, remember, there's a protocol that I've talked about a few times that some doctors came up with having to do with COVID, and that is anticoagulant. So this is an American College of Cardiology. It's an interventional study in hospital anticoagulation in prophylactic and therapeutic doses. In other words, a prophylactic dose is a dose that you would be prescribed if you were at high risk of having an occlusive stroke or heart attack, for example. A therapeutic dose is one that would be used to try to break up something that was already going on. They didn't find a lot. They found a little bit more in the way of bleeding side effects, which, by the way, can be very bad, especially if you get one in the brain. Okay, that's hemorrhagic strokes are no joke, guys. They can kill you. But again, we are talking about this particular intervention was centered on people who were already in the hospital and were very sick. And it found a substantial difference. And this is a very interesting situation. When you look at this, a primary outcome, we had a much lower hazard ratio and a secondary endpoint for intubation. So the hazard ratio is 0.53. That's with a 95% confidence interval of 0.45 to 0.62. That's a big deal, folks. That's almost half. Okay? That is not a small change. So, now that we've gone through these, let me tell you where my problems are with where we stand today. We're all screaming mask, 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 and that's wrong. That's just flat out wrong. Fully half of the people who got killed by this thing were probably going to die sometime in the next year or so anyway, because that's just the reality in nursing homes, is that your average lifespan once you go into a nursing home is 6 months. Okay, that's the median, actually. It's not the average, the median, which is even worse. Most people don't realize that, but that's the median lifetime once you're admitted to a nursing home. So the vast majority of the people who this virus killed were going to die sometime within the next 6 months. However, they still died earlier than they should have, okay? And they died because instead of isolating them and their caregivers, we instead decided to play lock down the economy and tell everybody to wear ineffective diapers on their faces, which we knew were ineffective because we knew that there was fecal transmission of this bug in February and early March. We knew this because it happened in Wuhan, it happened in Hong Kong. I wrote about it, I talked about it, I blogged about it, and I did video logs on it as well. We also knew that healthcare was almost certainly a vector because this thing got into Kirkland and the nursing home and it ravaged that. And then in addition to that, we knew that not everybody was susceptible because not everybody got it and died in Kirkland, and not everybody got it and died in Diamond Princess. And we've had multiple examples of this since. And since then, we've had all these people running around with computer models telling us we all had to wear face diapers. These are the same sort of computer models that told us that 200,000 people were going to die in Sweden when 6,000 did. The models are equally worthless, folks. We have hard science from 20 years ago, actually 40 years ago now, 1981, okay, 40 years ago, says that masks don't work to reduce as source control in an operating room, in a confined environment where everybody plays by the rules. Not only do they not work, the infection rate was twice as high when they were in use. The p-value on that study, by the way, was 0.05, which means there's only a 5% chance that the outcome that they observed was due to randomness. 95% chance that it really was caused by the lack of masks. It actually cut the infection rate in half. So half those people are dead. And they died because we allowed politics to get in the way of doing the right thing. We took steps that were extraordinarily expensive and put a whole ton of people out of work, and was still doing it. We're still having our mandates and our mask orders and all this other BS instead of solving the actual problem. We have now reached suppression in most areas in the United States. Not all of it. The rest will come. But in addition, we know how to treat this disease. We now know that not only does hydroxychloroquine appear to work, but ivermectin appears to work even better. Hey, 50% reduction is a big deal. Okay? 30% reductions are a big deal. And if you end up with florid, really serious, bad news, COVID-19, we know it's a thrombotic disease. And in addition, and by the way, I read through that entire study. I got the whole PDF and I read through it. One of the things that was very interesting is on autopsy, a very large percentage of the people that this thing died while they had it, okay, had severe thrombosis in their lungs. Now, I want to close this podcast with this. The so-called standard of care right now is to tell you to sit at home unless you have shortness of breath. Basically, take Tylenol and relax. Cool your jets. Let your body fight it off. Folks, as I pointed out very early in this disease, in March, by the time you get to the point that your oxygen saturation starts to fall, you're in a lot of trouble. Not a little trouble, a lot of trouble. The average human being has somewhere between 6 and 10 times the pulmonary and cardiac capacity that they require to sit around and be, quietly amused, or recording a podcast like this, or cooking dinner, or laying in bed, or watching television. An athlete may have 20 or more times that capacity. To tell somebody to allow a virus to destroy 70, 80, 90% of your pulmonary capacity before you attempt to treat it is criminally insane. Especially when we have interventions that are very low risk and we know work. Do they work for everybody? Of course they don't. But they work for a lot of people? Yeah, they do. Why aren't we using them? Convalescent plasma, ladies and gentlemen, has a comparable reduction, supposedly, if you believe this study, to either ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. Why not use both? Are they additive? I don't have any idea. What's the interaction on that? I don't know. Could we find out? I suspect we could. An awful lot of places that have parasitic infestations also have malaria. Are they prescribing these two drugs in combination in those parts of the world? If they are, is there any kind of a safety signal that says that you shouldn't do that? I suspect that that answer is in the literature and is very easily discovered. Why aren't we handing this out to everybody who gets this disease before their pulmonary degradation occurs? Well, part of the reason is because we don't know, because when you go to get tested, you don't get results right away. Sometimes it takes a few hours, sometimes it takes a few minutes, sometimes it takes a few days, and sometimes it takes a week or more, by which point the result is completely worthless to both you and to informing public health. But we have companies that are making tens of millions of dollars a day doing this. And we have companies that, give your plasma. Please give your plasma. So some lab can turn around and process it and make tens of thousands of dollars, or thousands of dollars at least, shooting it up into somebody else's arm. You can buy enough ivermectin to treat a horse for about $10. So how much would it be to treat a human? Oh, what, $1? Maybe. How much is hydroxychloroquine? 6 cents a tablet or something like that? We only have 60 million of those tablets in the national stockpile right now that are rotting away. Why are they rotting away? Hey, it's not, there was an argument to be made that those people that had RA and lupus and were using it as a maintenance drug would have trouble getting it because we didn't have enough supply. But now there's 60 million tablets of it sitting in the national stockpile. Why don't we just give you a 5-day course of it, low dose, at first indication of trouble? By the way, those studies, they didn't find any QT problems of substance in anyone that didn't already have a known issue with that. You don't want to use Z-Pak? Well, Z-Pak has issues. So use doxycycline. Doesn't have cardiac issues. Is the whole story zinc? I don't know if it is or not. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. How many people are zinc deficient? I don't know that either. Okay? What I said when this disease began, folks, all the way back to February and March, the first podcast I did on this, when we got the data out of Wuhan that said that 95% of the time they shoved a tube down your throat, you're dead, was that the way we had to focus our attention, where we had to put our medical attention, and the way we processed this as a disease and as a society is we had to find ways to keep people out of the hospital. We had to find interventions that worked when the virus was still replicating and keep you out of the hospital. Stuffing you full of heparin as a last-ditch effort to save your butt does appear to work in a good percentage of people. But the first goal ought to be to prevent you from ending up there. And there has been zero effort put towards that. With drugs that are so safe that we have dosed billions of times. In one case, we're doing it wrong, folks. We're still doing it wrong. And we're telling people to run around with a diaper on their face when now, all of a sudden, the media admits, it's in shit. Which I noted in February. You want to know why I don't do tickers every day? You want to know why I'm not out here with podcasts every day following this thing anymore? This is why. Because I have clown faces like Larry Waters, Governor Bill Lee, half the rest of the universe. Sorry about that. My screen timed out. Half the rest of the universe running around passing mandates. Oh, my God. And you've got a governor in Virginia who his health person says he's going to try to make vaccinations mandatory. Well, you know what? The only thing you ought to be then you can figure out what you ought to be vaccinated with if you try to do that. Folks, we are essentially at suppression in the United States right now. That's why the case count's going down. That's why the death rate is low and is stabilized. All the interventions did was drag it out. It didn't change a thing. But we could have changed things. We could have intervened. We could have, of the people who have died, 3/4 of them probably shouldn't have. And if we'd actually went where the science took us in February and March, most of the 50% who died in nursing homes would not have died at all. At all. And a very substantial percentage of the people who had died outside of nursing homes also would not have died. Likely at least half. Because we knew, again, early on, March, that both hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were likely effective. If you're scared of the possible cardiac problems that hydroxychloroquine has, well, guess what? Ivermectin doesn't have them. We've given people billions of doses of that drug worldwide, folks. Billions. These are drugs that have safety profiles that go back decades. And we knew very early on, because we had a few medical groups, one in California in particular, another one out east, that had figured out that this was primarily a coagulation problem and that if you could solve that, people didn't die. At least a lot of them. And they start doing that, and there's actually a published protocol for it. Fancy that. So why are we still spinning our wheels with this thing, folks? Why the fear porn every day? Oh my God, you must stay in your house. Oh my God, you must wear a diaper on your face. Oh my God. Folks, one of the rules of politics, virtually any problem, I don't care if it's public health, I don't care, anything that has a political context to it, 80% of the issue is easy to fix and costs almost nothing. We could have solved 80% of this problem in terms of the deaths and the morbidity for almost no cost. Yeah, it probably would have been, a few tens of billions of dollars to pay hospital workers and nursing home workers to essentially quarantine in place in the buildings and deliver their food at the curb. Hey, listen, you want Chinese and or sushi every night for the next 6 months or whatever, we'll do that for you. And you know what? The RV, I get it isn't the nicest place, but hey, you know what? We'll give you free Netflix. And just nobody can come in or leave. We could have done that. We could have done that. We could have done a whole number of things like that. We could have used the drug therapies that we have that we knew had reason to believe would work. And about 75% of the people that are dead now would not be. But then you wouldn't have a political issue, would you? So instead, we've blown $3 trillion plus. Nancy Pelosi is running around appears to be pulling on handles of vodka from her physical appearance. She looks drunk. I don't know if she actually is. Boy, what I wouldn't give to have her blow a breathalyzer before she came up to the microphone. And and at the same time, we are decimating the hospitality businesses across this country. Still today, 6 months into this. And we have people strutting their stuff because they're politicians and they know better than this. And they're going to follow the science. Just like the science said, don't eat bacon. Yeah. It's really up to you, folks. Because you know what? Until the people of this country, especially the business owners of this country, stand up, if you run a small business or a medium-sized business and you've been decimated by this, you run a hotel, a convention center, or whatever, a wedding venue, you've been shut down. Jeff Bezos is laughing at you. He thinks it's funny. Out of the $3 trillion that the Fed's printed up, 7 dudes with him at the top of the list have made most of it. Well, you go broke and piss off virtually everybody who used to be your customer. Think about that a little bit. Ticker guy.